welcome to the IdeaCast interview series, episode 11. My guest today is Dr. Steven Gardner. Dr. Gardner is an internist at the Massachusetts General Hospital, as well as an assistant professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School and past medical director of the Massachusetts Special Olympics. He is a past winner of the Harvard Medical School of Humanism in Medicine Award. Dr. Gardner is also a prominent photographer whose images focus on the resilience of people facing adversity and the compassion of caregivers. His work has been exhibited in Boston and Martha's Vineyard, where he is a volunteer physician at Camp Jabberwocky. The location and inspiration for many of the stories in his forthcoming book, Jabberwocky, Lessons of Love from a Boy Who Never Spoke. I invite you to spend the next hour with Dr. Gardner and myself as we talk about family, community, connections, love, loss, and transcendence. And a young man who, without ever speaking a word, created change and impact on people's lives that reverberates to this day. So please, join us for this conversation. And I think you'll take something away that is beautiful and special for you. Enjoy. I'd like to welcome Dr. Steven Gardner to the IdeaCast interview series. Dr. Gardner, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Justin, for having me.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to have a really beautiful discussion with you about Graham Gardner and Jabberwocky, this beautiful book that you've created. And a book that has a beautiful life and presence of its own. And before we go back and forth in a discussion, can you go ahead and just, for those who haven't heard of the book or are just getting to this video without any backstory, could you give us a little background on yourself and Cynthia and then Graham?
So I'm a primary care internist in Boston. And we had just one child, Cynthia and I did, a boy named Graham, and he was born with something called cerebral palsy, which is sort of a wastebasket term for an injury to the brain or spinal cord. It can be mild or severe. It turned out he had a fairly severe form of cerebral palsy, meaning that he was not able to walk or talk, feed himself, or pretty much do anything during his 22 years of life without assistance. During his life, we discovered a magical place on Martha's Vineyard called Camp Jabberwocky, which is a summer camp, one of the very first summer camps for people with disabilities in the United States, along with Crip Camp, that's gotten some notoriety recently in a documentary. But it was back in the 1950s, early on, when the role of people with disabilities really wasn't very well developed. So it was a pioneering camp, and we were lucky enough to get in the door there when Graham was about 10 years old. And we discovered in that place almost an alternate universe, a place where people with all kinds of abilities and all kinds of disabilities come together in this beautiful setting and laugh together, argue sometimes together. In the end, they support one another and they develop a connection in which everyone is really treated as an equal. And I was lucky enough to find my way in there as a camp doctor while Graham was a camper there. Otherwise, I would have been summarily expelled because parents are not encouraged to stay around there.
Right.
Parents are encouraged to trust that the camp knows how to take care of their loved one. And the camp does know how to do that. And it's a place of joy and laughter, mutual support, resilience, and fun. And we were lucky to be part of it together for 13 summers before Graham died.
Mm-hmm.
And then he died of a seizure, which is often a complication of cerebral palsy, epilepsy. And after that, his mom and I had to decide whether we wanted to go back to camp as volunteers, knowing that it would be painful on the one hand without him, but also knowing that that support and Jabberwocky love that exists there would nourish us in our time of grief. So we did go back there. So my book sort of explores the arc of Graham's life during those early years and how he came to grips with his disability, how he learned from people with disabilities to think about things a little bit differently. And then after he passes away, there's the matter of dealing with grief and how we all deal with the loss of somebody we love that much. And the big question, of course, is, will we see him again? So there's that. And then finally, toward the end of the book, there's the question of whether there are signs in the world that maybe somehow cross the land of the living and the land of the departed in ways that defy, logic or probability, whether there's any such thing as happenstance or not. So there's an element there about that as well, whether there are signs in the world that we sometimes are too busy to notice, but that connect us in invisible ways with other people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because behind your shoulder is a poster of Graham, and it fluttered a moment ago. It just undulated a little bit. So we could say it's the air circulating, but I was just listening to you and then it fluttered and I'm like,
so there you go. That's one of those questions. Yeah.
Right. You have to appreciate the subtlety, but if you're open to it, yeah, absolutely. And you touch on that beautifully in the book, not just in your own experience, but in the experience of others. And that's one thing I want to explore is, we can do it now, is, and I'll start, I guess, by saying, for those who are coming to this video, and Dr. Gardner, if you'll permit me, and hopefully I won't sound trite or pedantic in saying this, but I'd like to talk about how this book affected me. I think it was Katie Farrell in the book that took sort of the Eastern philosophy or belief, wisdom teaching perspective on it, and the Brahman and the universality of the Godhead. And in reading your book, I also lean into Jungian interpretation of things sometimes. And what Graham Gardner presented to me, and I'll stop there for a second and say that this book is Graham Gardner. It is a living representation of Graham Gardner. So you've done an excellent job in presenting Graham to the world. And so he lives on through this book. And so the archetypes, which I decipher archetypes as being ideas, thoughts, as actualized through persons, greater thoughts, greater mind, being actualized through persons. And what I saw in Graham, again, as Katie invokes, there's an impermanence that the Buddha talks about. I think she called him Buddha, and the little Buddha. And that's beautiful, because the Buddha emphasized the impermanence of life. And so to be taken from us at 22 years of age, and from your family at 22 years of age, points to that impermanence and to the salience that we should all have, or the awareness that we should all have, that our lives are impermanent. And it's the quality of the life that is lived in that. And the other takeaway that I had that had to do with archetypes or representations was all of us who have the ability to speak and the ability to interact bring with it a duality of the ego and our perspectives on things. And you even reference it in the book and say, well, as parents, Cynthia and I had, we didn't have a child that had to be bailed out of jail for getting in trouble or for mouthing off to us during those beautiful years of insolence known as the adolescent phase.
Yeah, right.
That innocence that was preserved in Graham spoke to people in a way that and in multiple layers, it was transcendent. So here is a beautiful human being, and physically, photogenically beautiful, but also just the purity of the heart. And that is, to me, is again an archetype. And if you want to talk about wisdom teaching, the Christ, the archetype of just being an absolutely pure person who was teaching empathy and humanity and compassion. So that's what I took away. And again, I don't want to sound too trite and too overly dramatic, but that was the impression left with me. And so for those who are coming to this, if that has any affect that, this young man brought in an incredible message, even though he was never able to speak a single word. He spoke beyond words. And I think that should resonate with all of us, because like you and myself, we're communicating with words and we're delivering good information, but to be able to just be a representation of something of pure love and non-judgmentality and being present for others, it to me, that was beautiful and really helps this book go beyond just being a book, right? So anyway, I'm rambling and I'll give it back to you, but that was my takeaway in the book, is that Graham is alive and well in this book, and he's changing trajectories of the people that experienced him in the physical agency of his being, corporal being. But beyond that, in your book, he continues to offer that opportunity to shift.
Justin, that's beautifully summarized. Really, thank you. Thank you.
Oh yeah, that's how I was impacted. So.
At Camp Jabberwocky, I think when we come to the end of our summer session there, whether we're campers or volunteers, we've lived in this community, this family of mutual support and laughter and silliness and love. That's quite remarkable. And when we get on the ferry and go back to the real world, in finger quotes, we all sort of share the same question, which is, why can't the real world be more like Camp Jabberwocky?
Right.
And so people like Graham, I think, show us an alternate way of living in which those values that I just spoke of at Camp Jabberwocky prevail. And the stuff that we're battling right now, the dissonance in our society, the polarization, the suspicion and the malice, those things don't seem to exist much at Jabberwocky or in Graham's world.
Right. Yeah. They say we live in a post-truth world, and so in the pure innocence and pure joy and pure in the moment expression of being, which I believe is something that manifests from Camp Jabberwocky, there is no room for any kind of truth value or truth claims or anything like that to volley those things back and forth. You're just being present, and you're being there. You're appreciating life for what it is. Even if you have a physical or a mental challenge to work through, you are transcending that to be present and to be in communion with others who are willing to enter into that social contract with you and enjoy life, right? So why can't we take that across the sound on the ferry, as it were? Yeah.
And then, in my view, after being at Jabberwocky for all these years, 25 years, minus one for the pandemic. My question is, don't we all have disabilities? And at Camp Jabberwocky, of course, you see people in wheelchairs and they have visible signs of disability. But the rest of us are walking around seemingly able-bodied. And in different ways, we probably all are very imperfect. We all have disabilities as well. And at Camp Jabberwocky, one of the blessings is that we can all be exactly who we are. We don't have to pretend to be anybody else. That's one of the things.
Oh yeah. There's no need for a persona when you're there and being authentic. And again, just celebrating every moment, sunrise to sunset. That's
well, as one of the camp directors, Kelsey, loves to say, we take our silliness very seriously at Camp Jabberwocky. So you can be silly. You can be whimsical, you can be playful, and you can live in the moment from the time you arrive there till the time you leave.
Absolutely. And I believe you all had, towards the end of the book, you had a day out and were able, I think, to go to the lighthouse. I could be mixing it up, but you were able to go to the lighthouse as a team from Camp Jabberwocky, and then you came back and you had an evening of reflection and sitting around and you reminded each other about what Jabberwocky, the poem, is. And it's about, essentially absurdity and the inversion of normalcy and reality into a sort of fantastical, beautiful farce. And maybe that's one of the things that's missing from, again, this post-truth world of consternation and so forth. It is in its own right a very absurd phenomenological thing, that we are in constant strife. And so the
I guess the punchline is on us that that absurdity is needed right now, I think, to see the folly of our contrivances, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not judging either side of any discussion. It's just, if we look in and get lighthearted about things and realize, once again, going back to impermanence, that nothing we're upset about or worked up about on this day in 2021 will have much relevance in 5 years, or in terms of the value we put into it. Right?
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
And in the book, you profile so many amazing people, and I'm a common person. I'm nobody, right? And I say nobody in the sense that I honor that I don't have anything that I can say that I am beyond myself. And in the people that you discuss in this book, you really come up with some beautiful persons and characters of persons being who they are, that again carry that light that Graham or opened up a light within themselves that Graham presented to them. And I think that's another beautiful attractor or point of this book that people can take away, is that you're going to meet quite a number of people, some of whom are lively characters, others are just very sublime and beautiful. Wade at the lighthouse, I believe, was one of them, and some of the persons who did have, were ostensibly dealing with physical limitations, but just so lit up inside, right?
Exactly. And I think all these people, whoever they may be, they illustrate the idea that we are all in this together. Whether we're a custodian somewhere, or whether we're a CEO someplace, we're all part of this human family, and there are these invisible lines of connection, in the words of Rabbi Lawrence Kushner, that connect us. And sometimes we see them and sometimes we don't, but they are there. And if you're going through the world with someone like Graham, those invisible lines of connection frequently become more visible. And you meet people from many different backgrounds that suddenly emerge and come into your life in delightful ways that you maybe otherwise wouldn't have ever gotten to know very well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the persons that I've interviewed recently is a traumatologist, and she has, and this is a symbolic offering that she gives to the world, but she talks about trauma as a fractal system. And so if you think about the Mandelbrot sets and the constant iterative distribution of repeating patterns, et cetera, that she uses that as a means to recognize traumatic patterns in the human story and in the world we occupy. And so I can sort of change the word trauma to love and compassion and sharing. And so I see that same kind of fractal. This is tying into what you were saying about connections and that iterative process of just distributing itself outward. So again, Graham was the singularity of that in this instance in the book, and that those iterative fractal patterns kept repeating out by his just being that loving personification of acceptance and innocence in a sense, but a wise innocence, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think we all want to belong to something greater than ourselves. And at Camp Jabberwocky, we have that wonderful feeling that we belong there. We're part of a family. Whatever our backgrounds may be, whatever our traumatic histories may be, whatever adversity we're dealing with, in that place we're together. In that place we have one another's support. We have something called Jabberwocky love in that place, which is sort of a very profound version of caring deeply about one another. And so whatever the traumas are in our background, we're there to assist each other. And also to laugh together about it if we can. The writer Marina Keegan, who passed away tragically as a young woman, coined the term the opposite of loneliness, which I really love. And it was her way of trying to describe a community or a family of people like the campers and the volunteers who share this experience and share these emotions, share this mutual support and silliness. And there's not exactly a word in our lexicon for that. But she said, whatever it is, it would be the opposite of loneliness. And I love that expression, because that's exactly how we feel at Camp Jabberwocky. And that's exactly how we wish we could feel when we leave the island and go back to our, quote, real lives.
Yeah. You had mentioned the idea of extended family in this book and illustrated that a number of times. And that speaks wonderfully for what you just said, is that it is possible to have family beyond. My wife and I call it our genetic association, or our associates of genetic commonality, or whatever. Because I have a very dysfunctional family, so they're just my biological associates on one side of my family, and I wish them no malice, but I have nothing to do with them, and it's mutual. But anyway, but the idea of family can go beyond your gene line and or your filial association. So I think that's beautiful that there are in this instance, the Jabberwocky network and system presents that opportunity to have the non-biological family system set up, because to me, it's just as powerful. I've made friendships in my life that go far beyond anything that I could think of in having with just direct family, and that. So that's a beautiful opportunity for people to consider that it's not all written in stone when it comes to the F word, the family word.
That's right. That's right.
You had a lot of reference, or not a lot, but there were a number of references in the book towards music and songs that associate with a time and a space. And there was a song that I pulled up in having read this book, and I'll pass it on to you. And there's a group called the Dead Can Dance, and they did a song on their album Aeon back in 1990, and it's called Fortune Presents Gifts Not According to the Book. And that kept resonating in my mind. And it was actually, they lifted that from Luis de Góngora, and 17th century Catalonian poet or something. But anyway, it talks about how the blessings and the miracles and the beauty that show up in our lives doesn't always come in that Hallmark card prepackaged kind of idealization. And so I say that to people in the audience, that when we think about somebody who's dealing with a severe physical or cognitive issues, that in its own right is not any kind of means of dismissing the beauty and the functionality and the presence of a person. The more socially aware folks are calling that ableism, when we sort of take for granted I'm relatively healthy, I'm relatively put together, but again, fortune presenting gifts not according to the book. So we tend to just again stylize and idealize what is perfect, what is whole, what is a put together person. And that was again a big takeaway for me, and a reminder that Graham offered that opportunity to say, this body may not be up to snuff, but the presence and the beauty of my nature and my spirit are more than enough, and they transcend the little bit of limitation that you see in front of you. So I offer that song. It's a beautiful song too. It's sort of a medieval instruments and things like that. But that came to mind as a song for me.
I'll check that one out.
Yeah, I can pass you the link. It's a cute song, but anyway. Now I want to ask a few questions that may again be helpful to the audience, and I hope that I know this video will get passed around and it will show up in the lives of people who need to see it and hear it, because part of the rubber hitting the road in this book is dealing with some very real matters in the human experience, in the human condition. And the first thing I will do is ask you, again, for the sake of others, writing this book, I imagine, was part of the greater structure of your grieving and your healing. I imagine that this was a healing journey for you.
It was indeed, and continues to be. Mm-hmm. Even listening to you right now is part of it.
Okay.
But that's right. I think when I started, it was almost like I was creating memories for myself to put in a desk drawer so that I wouldn't forget adventures that we'd had or experiences that we'd had.
Mhm.
And becoming a book was sort of a strange organic thing that slowly happened without any particular conscious process. But at some point, I began to realize that there were stories in the book, that there were themes that were more universal, that might be inspiring to other people, not just friends and family.
Mhm.
Stories, for example, about how a 15-year-old girl on Martha's Vineyard at Camp Jabberwocky could be a caregiver for an adult who's really completely disabled, and how a person like that has the wherewithal to pull that off at such a young age. And that is, even though I'd been a doctor for a number of years when I first got to Jabberwocky, and I'd been surrounded by kind people, nurses and doctors and therapists all that time, when I got to camp and I saw these very young people who seemed to have this sort of ethos of taking care of others being the most important and most rewarding thing, that just stunned me, and still does to this day. So being around people like that has inspired me, and I think that's why the people of the island have embraced Camp Jabberwocky over the years. And without the support of the Martha's Vineyard community, the camp could never have flourished. But that's an example of sort of an observation by me that was quite stunning, that I think can be helpful in other people's experience too.
Absolutely. And so if a 15-year-old can have and as a matter of fact, if I would almost say that a 15-year-old has an advantage that they don't have, like me, like 20 or 30 more years of baggage attached, so that I could be cynical or I could be numb and insulate myself from what might otherwise be considered an adverse situation or a challenging situation. That's so beautiful that a 15-year-old can be an example to say, hey, I'm showing up. I am here for someone. I am beyond myself at this point. And so let the 15-year-olds teach people my age and older or whatever, to be that for someone else.
Well, it's humbling for me when I think of where I was at when I was 15.
Yeah.
I certainly wasn't like that.
Yeah, right.
But it made me think about sort of the age-old question about nature and nurture, genetics and environment. How does somebody get like that at such a young age? And my conclusion is that it's more about environment, that they probably saw their older sister doing that when they were sort of a camp intern as a youngster, hanging out. And they probably saw their 18-year-old older sister doing it, who maybe serves as their role model. And they recognized that maybe the only true gift was a portion of oneself. And they saw that happening in their older sibling, and wanted to be like that.
Right. Yeah, it's
so that's one way to explain. Yeah.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, who better to inspire you than the one you are is closest to you and that you look up to. So
yeah.
And again, your book is replete with these examples of people who step up or who may change their worldview or at least their regional view about the importance of being humble and in service and stepping outside of your own sort of web of self-importance that we find ourselves in. And there's need for that. You need to have some sense of self-care and importance, but there's that balance, there's that spectrum that can be appreciated. And again, people like Graham and others show up for you to remind you of those boundaries, right?
Justin, I'd say it's actually a gift to go to Camp Jabberwocky and not think about yourself for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and to not worry about how you look, or whether you've shaved or what your clothes look like, because you're interested in how these other people are doing, the campers. And sort of paradoxically, that's a delightful gift to not have to think about ourselves for that period of time, because we spend so much of our time thinking about ourselves and how we look and where we're going. And fretting about ourselves.
Yes, yes, that has a lot of weight behind it. And one way I remind myself of that way of thinking is that, again, in an age of polarization, I like to go back to, and you could do this either in a spiritual sense or a very scientific sense. So I'll go down the road of science because it's almost incontrovertible that we are a monotypic species. We are Homo sapiens. And we could take the spiritual spin on that, and a lot of, especially in more Eastern oriented thinking, and even in the Abrahamic belief systems, that we are one family and we are united in a sense by commonality, by common experience, by the ability to suffer, the ability to feel joy, the ability to be compassionate or to be sociopathic. All these commonalities that we have to perhaps acknowledge. But going back to our being a single species, when we can look at it through that lens, that being there for someone else is beneficial to yourself as well, or to the community. We evolved, one of our pro-adaptive traits as this species was to be social, was to pass information around to one another, to support one another. So I do that for myself as a way of anchoring that idea that if I get selfish or I start thinking of the thems and the opposites, and then I say, no, I can't do that. I have to try to pull myself back. Yeah. And again, Camp Jabberwocky is the persona. It is the indication of that we have that ability within us to be that.
Wherever I go around the island, I run into people who just seem to intuitively get that. Mm-hmm. The people of the island, for example, one year I bought a couple of kayaks for camp, to donate to camp. And I went to a marine supply store to buy some life vests. And I happened to be wearing a Camp Jabberwocky t-shirt. And I stood in line, and when I got to the front of the line, the fellow said, are you from Camp Jabberwocky? And I said, yeah. And he said, get out of here. Nope, you don't have to pay. So the people of the island just get that, whether it's the guy in the marine store or any number of other places around the island, they sort of understand that Jabberwocky's presence there makes everyone on the island part of one community or one big family.
Yeah,
and it's a delightful thing to experience that as we go around the island and experience other people.
For sure.
Yeah.
Going back briefly to your having written a book and having been part of your healing journey, would you say that it would be therapeutic and constructive for persons who are in the first couple of steps of what you've been through, what you went through just 11 years ago now, February 6th, the journaling of the both the past and the present, and bringing that loved one who has passed narrative into a tangible script or dialogue or writing, I guess. Would you say to people watching this video that may have some therapeutic value to be able to process in a way by pulling up the memories, the good memories of that person, especially in the loss of a child or a young adult?
Yeah, I mean, that's the harshest reality, is losing somebody we love. Mm-hmm. And I mean, for me, yes, it worked nicely to write stories and to remember things. I think you have to balance doing that with also moving on into your own future and not dwelling so much on what happened 10 years ago or before, that becomes all consuming. But for me, yeah, it was cathartic or therapeutic, and also fun at times to remember special things that happened. I'm looking forward to having a party, a gala of some kind, in the not too distant future when people are comfortable doing that, in which I will invite as many of the characters in the book as possible to come together for a celebration of Graham's legacy, and for an opportunity for me to say thank you to them for the roles that they played in his life and in our lives. So for me, remembering all of that and hopefully bringing them back together in a sense through these invisible lines of connection that the book is helping to facilitate, that's going to be an ongoing, delightful thing for me. And I think the book is certainly helping keep Graham's presence in our midst. So yeah, I would encourage your listeners or viewers to think about writing down things. Sometimes we can forget even very poignant things. So it's nice to write them down before we forget them.
Right, and it seems a beautiful closure, not a closure, but a chapter conclusion or arrival to be able to journal that. And also, there was another traumatologist that I was researching, and he talks about broken connections when trauma occurs. And I think the passing of a loved one could certainly qualify as a traumatic event. And he talks about broken connections, and like you were saying, connections in a similar way, so that the writing or the documenting and the retrieval of memory and putting it down somewhere may help with that broken connection, so that you can start the next chapter. And as you said, move on, not morbidly dwelling on holding on to that person's memory in a way that may not be allow you to then move forward. So
yeah, I think, I mean, I will be acknowledge that I do not have 100% faith that I'll see Graham again. I have 100% hope that I'll see Graham again. So in writing the stories, keeping the memories alive is delightful, and I hope I get to see him again and create some new stories.
One of the, I told you about the philosopher that I spent 2.5 hours talking with, and he's an idealist. And so he, like the Brahmin, that, again, the Godhead, which is a good way to put it so it's relevant for people, that his way of looking at things is when your loved one dies, they become the world, they become the universe, they become the all. And so that it, he was sort of waxing poetic and philosophically. He goes, your loved ones are the air around you, it is the trees, it is everything that is part of your being a person interacting with this seemingly inanimate universe, or the life around us. And I like that. It's a nice way to, I think, stay grounded in the sense that your loved ones haven't gone anywhere. They haven't gone anywhere. And of course, we have all, very unique and distinctive ways of interpreting what things are, but that's a really nice place to start if you're really at a loss for where, and I'm not talking to you directly, I'm just saying folks watching, it's a beautiful way to start, and then you can figure out where things fit after that. But yeah, I loved how simply he put that it is just everything around you is your loved one, and they're with you constantly.
You probably would remember this better than I specifically, but there's a Hopi prayer that deals with that, that ends with the phrase, do not stand at my grave and weep. I am not there.
It's in your book, right?
I did not die.
Mm-hmm.
There's no need to cry. I'm not there. I did not die. Something like that. I can't quote it directly, but I think it speaks to what you just said, that our hope is that that person is still with us in some form, in some kind of energy around us, and hasn't truly left us. Right.
Again, we are essentially obligates of this planet and the ecosystem and the evolutionary, if you believe in evolutionary chain. And so it's life and death are very real to us. Once the body ceases to be alive, or the person ceases to be alive, it seems like a fait accompli for us, and that there is, but we don't afford the spirit and the vitality, just like you and I are having this conversation. It is very animate, it is very thoughtful, and that to me, again, just never goes away. And so the heart and mind, the metaphoric heart and mind, I can't think of any reason why that would not continue to be in our beautiful universe that we occupy. So, yeah. And again, any because there were a number of people who came to you after Graham had passed, and they had given some interpretations of what was going on, and about how God was, in relationship with the journey that Graham was on. And so there's so many beautiful ways, and so there's no wrong way, I don't think, of interpreting that, because they all lead in a sort of same transcendent direction of our tentative yet meaningful existence, and the importance that we can bring. I always like to say that, you hear some people say, oh, you're not special, or you're special. And it's like, well, you have the potential to be important, and you bring that by your actions. Words good, but actions also do better. And Graham was more of an action person, in a sense. You know, if you can really work on that idea of action, and again, not being able to communicate verbally, that was his channel, his muse to bring anything into the world.
Yeah, well said.
What I'd like to ask you, as we're going through some things that people drawn to this video, maybe dealing with a loss or dealing with somebody who has physical or cognitive limitations, two things came to mind, and knowing that I was going to have this interview. You talked about anticipatory grief. And I think I said that the way you said it in the book. Anyway, it's the term that I seem to remember. But what advice would you pass on to people who are along the same path that you've been on, but maybe not at the point where there's, they're dealing with memento mori constantly. They're dealing with the idea that there could be a transition of their loved one at any time. How do you get through, as best you can, anticipatory grief? Because you mentioned that in the book.
Yeah, so anticipatory grief refers to feeling sad about something that hasn't even happened yet, but you suspect it is going to happen in the not too distant future. And I'm no expert on this, Justin, but I think my answer would be just to savor this day as much as possible. As Rousseau said, this day is your life. You have this day. The campers at Jabberwocky are really good at that, living in the moment, carpe diem, not fretting too much about what may happen down the road. So anticipatory grief happens to a lot of us when we have someone who's coming toward the end of the line. It could be an elderly parent or grandparent, or it could be, even in this case, a child. And the only way I know of to deal with that is to just to savor every moment we have with them while we're here, while we're together, and not waste a minute of it. And in that sense, I try to be more like the campers, because the campers know how to not waste a minute of it, and they take their silliness very seriously, as Kelsey has said.
Yeah.
So I try to savor that and not fret too much about what's going to happen down the road.
Well said. Well said. And again, in this video, this interview is going to have a life of its own. It's going to have legs, and it's going to be mobile and get out into the world. And I really look forward to what you just said having a positive impact on people. And one other matter that I can bring forward that I think will have the same traction is, you mentioned in the book when Graham had become gravely ill with it was a encephalopathy, or there was an inflammation. What is that? You're the doctor. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're right. Encephalitis.
Oh, encephalitis. There we go.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned in the book, and I've had this not happen to myself, but I know people for whom this has happened, that this has happened too, is that in those moments of you being vulnerable, of you having this very tentative situation on your hands, that there was a noticeable absence of those for whom you considered to be in your orbit and your circle. So there is absolutely no judgment in saying that, but what I'm bringing this forward is to help others who have recently gone through this situation, or to prime them if they are in a situation where there is a crisis and you don't necessarily get the phone call or the text or the physical visit from someone. You can impart a little wisdom on that and how to get through that and still maintain your sense of love and support. Because my sort of naive takeaway on that is that some people have a really hard time with death and suffering and being pulled out of their bubble to share what would be considered suffering with someone else. And not everybody, we're all different, and not everybody can process that the same. So what would you say to those who either have recently gone through it or prep them for what may occur?
Well, in those moments, you hope for succor or support from your loved ones. You hope that they'll be there, but sometimes for reasons that you just cited, they're not. And in our case, in the instance that you just talked about, when Graham had encephalitis, we found an incredible support from people that we really didn't even know, who rose to the occasion and showed up and shared their solidarity, their support, and their love with us. So there are people who get that and are able to do it. And then there's people who just, for whatever reasons, are not able to do it. And we try not to judge those people too harshly that disappointed us. But be grateful for the people who were there in those moments, to give us support and solidarity and love. While I was walking the halls of the hospital in the wee hours, I thought about Rabbi Harold Kushner, who wrote When Bad Things Happen to Good People. And you're wondering, you have these existential metaphysical questions about why would God allow a thing like this to happen? And I explore that a little bit later in the book when one of my patients provides me with a really loving and wonderful communication in which he says, Dr. Gardner, when Graham passed away, God was the first one to cry. And so he believes, as did Rabbi Kushner, that God doesn't want people to suffer, doesn't want people to die young, but is not able to control all of that. But God is present in the love that happens in those moments. In this case, sometimes love from total strangers that come out of the blue, who support you in your hour of need. So I found that very comforting to hear from my patient that he believed that God was the first one to cry. And we took a lot of comfort from people who came by in those moments.
Right. In the early, I guess the early to mid axial age, the Hebrew interpretation of God was a co-creative process. It was a flowing with God. And the duality was less pronounced. And I'm coarse graining here because I've just listened to some lectures about, again, Abrahamic wisdom, and in the early Hebrew scriptures that God was a participatory God. It's sort of a tete-a-tete or an exchange with his creations. And you could extract that out further to say that the creations are essentially no different than that God in the sense that they are that creation of God. So, but anyway, the point I'm getting to is that in trying to understand how we could have a non-intercessional God or a God that does not intervene on the affairs of persons, and that includes our own tribulations and our own suffering, one could perhaps see, if this is in alignment with your sensibilities, that to be intercessional or to be interventionist as a omniscient, one, the singularity, that would interfere in the process of being alive and being human, because, and going back to the Buddha acknowledges that life is suffering. And so the narrative concludes with that as transcending suffering, but also what would we learn were not for suffering. Like I always like to say that suffering has been my greatest teacher. And I've had some difficulties in my life. I almost died about 10 years ago, and it was not one of those quick deaths. It was the descent into slow vegetative, I had Parkinsonism and I had massive cognitive deficits. I couldn't remember things. I couldn't understand what people were saying. I mean, it was like a real little, knock you for a loop kind of thing. Some people call it the dark night of the soul. But anyway, I got through it, got over it. I'm better now. But, if I hadn't suffered like that, if I hadn't been on the edge of death as I thought I was, I wouldn't have, it changed my life and it for the better. And so again, I'm rambling, but I think, when we talk about how could this happen? And that's natural. I think that's something we should ask is, how can this happen? How can my 4-year-old, and I've gone to funerals for 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds, and it's just heartbreaking. But again, if life were about intercession or not experiencing the suffering, right? I think we would not be there for God in the sense that God is there for us, right? We're not there. We're not doing our role. I don't want to say job, but we're not being in our part of this, whatever the mystery is. And I won't pretend to know what it is, but I think that's a participatory role, if that makes sense.
I mean, in some traditions, people would say, well, God works in mysterious ways and God meant for that to happen. I don't subscribe to that. I subscribe to the other view that God did not want that to happen. And in fact, God was the first one to cry when it did.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that and that's more consoling, I think, is to say that we are, if you will, on the same side. And so it, again, non-interventionist, non-intercessionist, non-meddling in the affairs, perhaps because it can't, or he or she can't, because there is this sense of separation. And of course, Advaita Vedanta talks about that, Buddhism talks about that, there's the veil, the samsara, the maya, what they call the illusion of separation and all of that. And that's fulfilling in a sense that we can't assign that to God or the God. It just wouldn't be fair. So I can reconcile that fairly easily, and knowing that if we didn't have loss, if we didn't have suffering, it wouldn't build our character and enrich our lives. And it sounds kind of, again, pedantic to say that, but I do have my suffering card. I've been through terrible things, not to the degree that some people have, but I've got my card. And so I'm not saying this as some sort of, again, trite person who's just talking down. That's my takeaway. Yeah.
I have a friend, Justin, who's 96, who's an Auschwitz survivor.
Ooh.
And I love being with him. He's obviously, that's the ultimate in resilience, but he has a loving family. He laughs, he's fun, we joke. He's a delightful friend. So yeah, without adversity, I mean, we all have adversity. Not many people have adversity of that magnitude.
Right.
But we all have adversity, and it's amazing when some people are resilient enough to get through it and find what's on the other side of it, and carry on. And some people struggle with it a lot more. So there's no one right or wrong way to say that.
Yeah.
But it's inspiring to see people that have dealt with adversity and come through it and still found joy and love and delight in what remains of their lives.
They can continue the celebration. Absolutely. Yeah. And Viktor Frankl is a beautiful example of in league with your friend, and he wrote books on the experience. Oh gosh, the name has escaped me, but the book he wrote, and he's a psychotherapist, and he's also a existentialist, but in the sense that he talks about a meaning vacuum, and his ability to survive Dachau or Auschwitz was facilitated by having a sense of meaning in his life. He saw beyond where he was, and every day he could have been thrown in the showers or something done to him, but he managed to get through. And when he came out the other side, he spent the rest of his life teaching people how to fill that meaning vacuum, and it was done from an enlightened perspective. So Viktor Frankl is just an absolutely amazing character, and reading his work will be transformative if it's right. So yeah, thank God for those people that have gone through that hellacious suffering. And another thing I notice is you'll see persons who are living in horrific, what we would in the Western world would call horrific conditions, but there's always, if they haven't been too traumatized, there's always a smile, there's always hope, there's always gratitude for the sustenance that they have, what they have in front of them. So, you get places where there have been wars or conflicts, or there's disputes, or there's just famine, natural things going on, and they have suffered through a lot. But when they've been interviewed and they're in discussions about what's going on, they have this sort of pragmatic sense of inventory for what is meaningful and what is important to them. And that breeds a type of, I guess, joy, if it can be had in their environment. So it's possible. I guess that's my point. It's possible. So I came across a French proverb yesterday, and I'll share this with you and the audience, and I'm going to hold on to it for the rest of my life. It is, gratitude is the memory of the heart. And I just came across that. I was looking for something else. I was like, oh my gosh, that's beautiful. That's going on my list. Gratitude is the memory of the heart.
Okay. I like that.
Right. And because the heart is pure. It's like Graham, it's pure. And there's, it's symbolically, of course, the heart is representative of purity, love, and that, what was the word? inviolate nature of our being. You cannot taint the heart, right? if you want to look at that metaphor.
Justin, to your previous point, Queen Elizabeth said, "Grief is the price we pay for love."
Mm.
So I think you were saying that, without adversity, without loss, it's hard to appreciate sort of the good stuff. And so she said, if we love deeply enough, sooner or later, we're going to have to deal with grief also as a companion.
Right.
And I think she's right, spot on with that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've not had children in my life, but I adopt rescue animals and shelter pets and things like that. And I mourn their loss when they pass, because they brought things to me. And it's compared to having a child, it's a tiny little thing, but it's nonetheless sort of the same practice. And so I mourn their loss when they pass, and they teach me that to appreciate the time that I had with them. And again, the impermanence of your relationship with anything alive, anything that's, we defeat entropy very briefly as living creatures, and then we go back, right? And that's what we have to live with, right? We can't deceive ourselves on that. There's no elite group of humans that never die. Otherwise, I'd be like, wait a minute.
Yeah. You can go to one of those cryotherapy places in Arizona and freeze your brain, but I don't think I'm going to go. I'm not going there.
No, I don't want to. I will be happy with 85 to 90 years if I'm lucky to have that. I don't need to live on. Even in the afterlife, I just want to become nature again. I don't need to be me again. I want my memories, perhaps. Carl Jung said, "We live for," and I'm going to butcher this. We live for the dead, and we live for those who came before us. The wisdom that they handed off to it, like the baton, we have to live for that. And so it sounds kind of harsh to say we live for the dead, but if you really extract that out, we live to carry on the memories of our ancestors and the wise people among us in the tribe or the community or the globe. And, the Mother Teresas of the worlds and the Gandhis and the Martin Luther Kings, those who stepped forward in a solution-oriented way and passed wisdom to us. We owe that to them to keep that going. Kind of like a grander filial piety where it's like we owe you something for your wisdom.
Yeah.
And that is to be wise ourselves and not take for granted. So.
Yeah.
You had mentioned the gala that you're going to and we'll visualize this happening. Will you be able to document that? Because when you said that, I was like, oh my God, that'd be a beautiful documentary. Perfect for helping as a companion to this book.
I hadn't thought about that, but that's a great idea.
I think it would be a beautiful.
For example, I'm going to try to get some of Graham's childhood friends to come, whom we haven't seen in 15 years or more. And it'll be amazing to see what's become of them.
Oh, for sure.
Just these kids that were intuitively kind and supportive as eight-year-olds. Mm-hmm. And now they're in their 30s and we haven't seen them since. It'll be interesting to see what's going on with them.
Right. And I think you even pointed a couple of instances in your book. I think there was the young man that went on to go into the Marine Corps and became a leader within the Marines. And he was very much impacted and took Graham with him into adversity, into lugging an 80-pound sack and freezing and all the things all the joys of being in the military in a far off place. He kept Graham, and there were a couple other examples that were just really beautiful. So again, for those watching this video, so much.
So I'm hoping to track him down, Alex, and many of the other characters in the book, and get him in one place and say thank you. And how are you? What are you doing these days?
That would be so powerful, and to give some of them a moment at the lectern to share with others. Wow. Yeah. If that comes to pass, if I could suggest, have a videographer there that's maybe they could work quid pro quo. Maybe they could just be in the experience. That I would do that just to be in the experience. I mean, hopefully you can find somebody just to volunteer. You don't need a award-winning filmographer or anything to do this. Right. A steady camera.
And we'll have a dance out at the end, a disco dance with wheelchair dancers, which is always a blast.
Oh my gosh. That's beautiful. One thing I'd like to do is, for those who are fascinated by your story. And this is a co-biography. This is you, this is your chapter with Graham, and this is Graham's entire life. What I would like to do is Camp Jabberwocky. How can people watching this video, in what ways can they contribute, and how do they, obviously you could Google, I imagine, Camp Jabberwocky,
Yeah.
but can you lead them in a little bit more on what they can do if there's something that can be done?
CampJabberwocky.org
Okay.
is a great resource. Under normal circumstances, meaning no COVID-19, Camp Jabberwocky absolutely loves visitors, and we hope that that day will come again. Everyone is welcome there to visit and to share in the experience if they can make it over to Martha's Vineyard. The price of admission is that you have to get up in front of the whole camp and tell an embarrassing story about yourself. And then you will be embraced into the camp family if you're willing to do that. So,
Nice.
so we love visitors. This summer, because of the pandemic, it's going to be limited, unfortunately. But the adventures, the podcasts, the activities of the campers can be followed at the website campjabberwocky.org.
Okay.
And also people who are inspired by that can do stuff like that in their own communities. And there are already a number of sister camps that have spun off from Jabberwocky in different places around the country.
Oh, beautiful. That's awesome.
Yeah,
That's
they're
great.
equally magical.
Oh, outstanding. That's good to hear. Because I know I intuit that there would be other organizations and facilities like Camp Jabberwocky, but to know that it's blueprinting, a repeatable system, that's awesome. Because as we've been discussing, let the world be more like Camp Jabberwocky, right? Where there's inclusion, there's humility, because if you're going to get up and tell that story, then
Yeah, exactly. So I think of it almost like a diaspora. When we leave that island, if we could just all spread out to wherever we came from and bring a nugget of that to the communities that we live in, that would be a nice thing.
For sure. And your book does that. Your book it invites people to have that vicarious experience. I was at Camp Jabberwocky in my mind through your book, and not quite to the effect that getting the sand between my toes and shaking hands, and I'll have to think about the most embarrassing, because I want it to be good and I want it to be really self-deprecating so I can be in that. But anyway, I've got a lot of them. But in the book, you are immersed in that environment and that vibe. As well as the vineyard itself, all the shopkeepers, the ice cream store, and the various places, the marine store. You do a very good job at telling the story and painting these mental images for us, and helping us to paint these mental images of what's going on. And that's true for everywhere. The ball games in Boston, and the environment of the marathon. Was it a triathlon or a marathon that you all had done a couple of times with the bicycle that was
it was a bicycle event, a fundraising event for the Jimmy Fund, which is the Cancer Foundation at Dana-Farber. Bicycle.
Okay. Yeah, so the book is just absolutely filled with beautiful mental potential illustrations that you can pull up and enjoy this the story of you and Graham and Cynthia and everyone. So many characters in this book to get invested in, and to enjoy and share some of the grief of what goes on. And I like the fact that this book deals with something that some people might find uncomfortable, and the first being a physical handicap, and the second being that if the story doesn't have a particularly happy ending for some, and others who can be really philosophical can see beyond death and grief and know what has transpired. The first person I interviewed for this series is a friend of mine, and she's a therapist, but she also developed ALS. And as a therapist, she shared her story in a book about her death process, and she hasn't transitioned. She's still with us, but I was so fortunate to get an interview with her, and it was like Stephen Hawking. It had to be done through the vocoder or whatever that is.
Yeah.
But what an enriching experience. But again, it's a book that you have to walk into it knowing that you're in for a ride, and because she doesn't spare anything. She's telling you about how she's dying, and so again, I bring that up because this book doesn't sugarcoat what is something that we all will inevitably experience, unless you're a hermit living in a cave somewhere. You have to go through this, and I think it's absolutely necessary to explore that. I don't even consider it shadowy. I think it's part of the light. I think it's part of the beauty of life, right? It's a contract we sign when we come out into the world as babies. It's like, I know I'm going to die, and I know all the loved ones I are going to pass around me, and before and after. So
it's a harsh reality. Yeah,
it is.
Can I just say, when I think about Jabberwocky, I like to think about Mr. Rogers and one of his iconic statements. The only thing that really changes the world is when one person gets the idea that love can abound and be shared. And I think that's exactly what Hellcat, Mrs. Lamb, the founder of Camp Jabberwocky, visualized. And that's exactly what's happened in the last 68 years, and hopefully will happen for the next 68 years down there.
Indeed.
So yeah, that has changed the world of Jabberwocky, the world of Martha's Vineyard, and we hope that it will spread further than that as time goes on.
Well, I'm going to be keeping my eyes on that story and that narrative, and I am going to be a supportive actor in that, in whatever capacity. And doing this video is a start, and getting this out, getting it into the landscape, into the environment for people to discover. Again, that's what I love. I'm not the biggest fan of social media, but I do like video platforms that have the potential to share and exchange these kind of stories and ideas. And so I am just grateful to have this opportunity to present this story with you to the audience that will discover it and engage with it. One other thing I want to ask you, and I know I've had you for about an hour now, I don't want to keep you all day, even though I could. The Hale Gardner Foundation, can you speak to that as well? About how people can get involved?
Yeah, so Hale Gardner Foundation is a deliberately small foundation that has the goal of allowing some people with disabilities to have special experiences, like going to camp or maybe taking a trip to Disney World. So we like to keep it small. We don't have delusions of grandeur, but it's basically tied in very closely with Camp Jabberwocky in the end anyway.
Okay, so people can discover that foundation and they can contribute to it to help, again, facilitate what your vision is and enable children who may not otherwise have opportunities to go and engage with life in an exciting way. Okay, well.
And then there's campjabberwocky.org, which has a lot of wonderful stuff on it too.
I encourage anyone watching this video that if you can, give Jabberwocky a look and give the Hale Gardner Foundation a look. It's simple and effortless and painless to give a few minutes of your time when you have the opportunity, and if you can, donate in a way that works for you. I encourage you to do that, because that is the spirit and the message of this book: is transcendence, it is sharing, it is humility and compassion, and all these beautiful tenets of the human spirit. And Dr. Graham, I'm changed myself by this book. I consider myself to be somewhat human, and I try to walk that walk. But every little bit of these little primers, these little pumps that help me, again, not fall off what I consider to be a hopefully reasonable path that I walk. These are beautiful guideposts for that walk that I'm on, and so I know that will impact others as well in that regard. So
thank you, Justin.
Yeah. Was there anything else absolutely, was there anything else you'd like to share regarding either the book or what's going on in Dr. Gardner's world? I want to give you some opportunity if there's anything else you want to share.
Just that we're all in this together, and we're a good society. We don't leave people lying on the side of the road, and we're all part of one community and one family. And that's a lesson that I learned from my son and from Camp Jabberwocky. And I believe in it.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'm not even going to add anything to that because that's perfect. That we'll stop with that on the wisdom and the sage of being. So I have a beautiful book in my hands. I would recommend those of you who are watching this video that you pick up a copy and check it out. It is well written, and it is an opportunity to, again, shift your trajectory, much the way Graham had shifted the trajectory of quite a number of people that will be present in this book during his brief life. But again, as I said earlier, I think the brevity speaks to a role that some special, you could call them souls or expressions or whatever you want, that afford us the opportunity to be so grateful for that which we have. It's hard to be grateful in the 21st century sometimes, I think. You know, we can complain very easily, but to be in that gratitude and call on the memories of the heart to remind us of what's important. This book is a beautiful place. So if you need to recharge that gratitude battery, check out Dr. Gardner's book, Jabberwocky. And I'll leave it at that myself. I think that's beautiful. So Dr. Gardner, I am, again, grateful to have had the opportunity to be in dialogue with you regarding not just the book, but the meta process around the book, what was going on in the world that you and Graham and Cynthia shared, the people who were affected, all the beautiful threads in this tapestry. Just a great experience. So thank you.
Justin, it's been a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you very
absolutely, much. Absolutely. And again, thank you to those of you who are watching this video. Very much appreciated. I will have all the links necessary for Camp Jabberwocky and for the Graham Hale Gardner Foundation. I'll have your website, Dr. Gardner, and the book can be had pretty much where books can be had, I'm going to say, right, Dr. Gardner? Okay, beautiful. So access.
It's officially being released, Justin, on the May 18, I think. But you it can be pre-ordered on Amazon, and it will be available every place.
Beautiful, beautiful. So yes, this is a timely conversation and on the heels of the release. So go ahead, pre-order. Again, all necessary and salient links will be available down below in the description field, so that you can either discover more or just begin your discovery with Graham Gardner and Jabberwocky, Camp Jabberwocky. Every town needs a Camp Jabberwocky. Thank you again, Dr. Gardner. I'll say goodbye to you after I stop the record button. And we could say goodbye to each other. And thank you all so much, those of you who were watching the video. I appreciate your time and attention on this beautiful book, and I wish you all a good day.